today we have a wonderful panel for you. This is our Patient-Centered Policy Roundtable. We have two leaders in the field. We have Angie Davis, who is the president of Fight Colorectal Cancer, and we have Genevieve Edwards, and she is the CEO of Bowel Cancer UK. Angie, could I ask you to kick us off?
Sure. I'm Angie Davis. I'm the president of Fight CRC. We are here in the US. We're primarily an advocacy organization, patient empowerment group, really focused on changing policy to improve access to care, screening, treatment, survivorship resources. We provide patient education, as well as really thinking through policy. So just recently we published our Path to a Cure report, really prioritizing where can we unite, work together to push our research community and our advocacy community to work together to find a cure for colorectal cancer. So we're really excited to be a part of this discussion and be with you today.
Great, thank you. Genevieve?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion today as well. I'm Genevieve Edwards and I'm Chief Executive of Bowel Cancer UK. And we work across all 4 nations in the UK because health is devolved and we do things slightly differently depending on where you happen to live. And we focus on 3 areas. One is research, how we can improve understanding of bowel cancer, screening, diagnosis, surgical technique, to make sure that we're constantly getting better and people survive and thrive beyond their diagnosis. We also deliver services and health information to support people on their cancer journey and their friends and loved ones. So putting people together for peer support, sharing stories, making sure there are places we can connect people. And then the third element is the advocacy and influencing, which we're talking about today, and I'm really excited.
Thank you so much for sharing about your organization, and really excited that we'll be talking together today because both Fight CRC and Bowel Cancer UK have a lot of shared lessons learned in the field of advocacy and policy.
I started at Fight Colorectal Cancer about 10 years ago from the university. And when I came on, really as a community, colorectal cancer was a little bit quiet on the policy side. We weren't really pushing an agenda. We were raising awareness. We were raising awareness around screening, prevention, and providing patient support. But we really needed a policy voice in Washington, D.C. And so it was great. About 10 years ago, I was able to reach out to Bowel UK and say, what are you doing in the UK? How is it working? They were really taking charge and they had a policy agenda. They were really moving things forward. So it was wonderful to be able to have a partner globally to say, how can we have a similar voice and tone here in the US? And at the time in the US, there was sort of an intimidation factor with advocacy, like, oh my gosh, I don't know policy. I don't know my members of Congress. I don't know how to do this. So we had started a campaign called 1 Million Strong. And out of that came our Strong Arm Selfie. And really out of those efforts, we were able to galvanize a community that was interested in advocacy and policy efforts. And we really learned from the Never Too Young campaign that Bowel Cancer UK had launched previously, that having a sort of a theme, something that people can rally around is really helpful. And I think very practically, people need an introduction to advocacy and to awareness. I don't think you just have that innately when you're diagnosed with cancer. I think that as an organization, being able to provide that structure is so important. And we learned a lot from Bowel UK and the efforts that they've executed very successfully.
And I think it absolutely goes both ways as well, doesn't it? We can see what other organizations are doing around the world. That's why it's great that we're bringing so many together today to share those stories and to learn from each other and what tactics work in which countries and things like that. And our Never Too Young campaign, of course, came from two women, 2 patients with bowel cancer who had really struggled, as a lot of younger patients do, to get diagnosed, and were determined to do something about it. And we joined forces, and I think that's where you get the real sweet spot, where you can add value to campaigns which you know are desperately important and need some momentum. And I think one of the power of organizations like that like ours is being able to create that network and make those connections. And of course, that campaign has led to the screening age being lowered in the 4 nations in the UK. It's not delivered yet. We've still got to keep the pressure on because the pandemic slowed all of that down. But it's really, really important for a successful campaign to really resonate with your community.
When it comes to developing an advocacy message, what are the key stakeholders that you look to engage as far as engaging and even identifying stakeholders to work with?
For us, we've really focused on patients and caregivers and family members. I think when we initially launched our first campaign, we did focus groups in 5 different regions of the country to really better understand the need and also the gaps that patients felt there were. And the one thing that we had been very responsive to, really focused on, because I think it was a gap that we felt was a niche that aligned with our mission, was this idea that it's not always pretty. So colorectal cancer is hopeful, it's relentless, and we have champions out in the community, but it's not always pretty, it's hard. And we, as an advocacy group that's really pushing on policy, needed to drive a sense of urgency. And so what we learned through our focus groups, not only with patients, caregivers, and family members, but with our policy stakeholders, was that without that sense of there's a consequence to this, like people are dying, there isn't a sense, okay, we got to fix it today. We got to do this together now. And so we really have tried to make sure that all our messaging captures that if we don't do it, no one else will. If we don't have a voice collectively, we won't be able to increase screening options, push for policy, provide the best treatment possible. And we've just loved seeing people gravitate to that. And our Strong Arm Selfies started with, I'm not even kidding you, like I think our staff was doing it. Like I was like, please everybody on staff do it so people will share their stories. But that, it sounds really silly that people are doing that, or silly or simple or all those things, but it's the thread that people are sharing their human journey with cancer, their authentic, gritty story from chemo chairs to with their families to funerals, and they're still finding strength and they still want to share their personal experiences, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, I'd agree. And then bringing together those common threads to see one of the challenges actually is that there are so many things that you could campaign on at any given time. There's so much that we need to change and move forward. It's working out which are the ones that are winnable, which are the ones that have the biggest impact, which are the ones mean the most, resonate the most with the community, and kind of going through that process to sort of figure out which are the ones we're going to focus our resources on, because we're not a big organization. If you look at other cancer charities in the UK, they are, broadly speaking, about 10 times the size of ours. There's something about colorectal bowel cancer that means that you have to fight harder. And so when we go through, we're quite sort of tactical with it, right? What are the key issues? Where can we really make some wins? Where can we really make a difference to the maximum number of patients? And working together with patients, we make those decisions, and then we go back out to our community and we test that. Have we got the right issues? Have we got the messaging right? Is this what you want to say? Is this how you want to say it? And I think something that Angie was saying as well about, urgency and tone and nuance is really important, because there can quite often be a fine line between influence and somebody kind of not listening, I'm not listening to that, you're just, blah, blah, blah. So it's really important to do that prep work, because the campaign will have a greater chance of succeeding. The other end of that, I think, so we will start with what's important to patients and their families, but the other end of that is who are you trying to influence, and what buttons can you press? What are the levers that will really change their mind? And then focus your campaign on that.
What happens when an urgent advocacy issue comes up that was a surprise? Just curious, has that happened? And if so, how have you addressed that?
Yeah, 100%. In the last 2 years, We were focused on optimizing the screening program, lowering the age, new treatments coming along, and COVID happened. And the needs of our community changed overnight. Words like shielding that we'd never went on our radar at all, and half our team were on furlough at this stage because of the impact on all our organizations have taken a hit, haven't we, in the last couple of years? So we had fewer people, we had something that we weren't expecting, and we had to suddenly make sure that people making very quick decisions that were affecting patients with bowel cancer, screening was paused, treatments were disrupted, surgery was cancelled, colonoscopies didn't happen. And our community was shut behind their doors, shielding. How did we advocate best for them and make sure that they weren't forgotten in all the noise of the global pandemic? And I think one of the things we did was we reached out to those other cancer charities and we said, you know what, this is affecting all of us in similar ways. Let's join together and speak under one cancer voice. And that's what we did. And we did that for two reasons. One, so we could be very clear with our community and we weren't saying different things. And the other was that together we were stronger with policymakers focusing on COVID.
No, I completely agree. I mean, who could have predicted COVID and the trickle effect to cancer patients and truly the magnitude of it for our cancer patients? I think, when COVID hit, it was in March. It was a few weeks before March, and we have our largest lobbying event in mid-March. And about 6 weeks out, we had to pivot and go from an in-person event to a virtual event during the pandemic. And I remember it was, that's when you see people shine, really. They really are committed to the cause. They know it's important. They know what's at stake. And we pivoted and the community responded. And I think that that's one thing that when you have an ongoing relationship with your community and you have, like Genevieve had said, you have a really targeted message, it's authentic, and you really have met their needs, they will show up for you. And I think that's what we've learned is that our community will show up. And so we had this global pandemic. We had to shut everything down. We knew Congress still had to have a message that patients are still out there and they're suffering and they need their help. And I thought it was pretty amazing on behalf of our team, but also the community more so, saying, you know what, we're going to grind and we're going to get online. We're going to do virtual meetings. We're going to make phone calls. We're going to email our members. And I think from a content standpoint, what we had to recognize in the year following was that mental health was an issue for our cancer patients. Not only, were they not able to make their appointments, things were shifted. Screening rates were down by 90% in the US. We needed to figure out how do we support them. And again, people were online. And I think that was the silver lining, is that we had this online platform. And to your point, Genevieve, we were able to collaborate and amplify and point to other groups, because I think we've learned we're not all things for all people. Like, we can't be that. There are groups that do things very, very well. And what we really committed to is we're going to point to the groups that do things really well, and we're going to stick to sort of what we do really well. And if anything, COVID really crystallized for a lot of groups how to focus and sort of cut programs that weren't sort of the main focus or thrust of their mission.
That's so true. And I think I completely agree. And that's one of our hopes for the colorectal and bowel cancer communities, is that we can share and direct people to existing resources as opposed to building new ones. If an organization shines in an area, let's send patients to that organization as opposed to creating another program. What does it take for an organization to be able to educate advocates to be able to speak on behalf of an issue?
I was talking to somebody the other day. I was like, as much as we are an organization where we, want as many people to come to the organization and share their story, we're also, I feel like, a really good filter for message and community. And when it comes to media, I think that's when you identify those sort of grass tops individuals who one, have a passion for telling their story, have a passion for the mission of your, or alignment with your mission. And really, I think the best interviews and the best storytellers are the ones that just are authentically telling their story. I think you can see when somebody's going off their talking points. And so, we've had some amazing survivors and caregivers and policymakers that they get the point, they get what we're trying to do, and they're great storytellers. But it's hard, I think, to encourage them to do it. And I think that's sort of our role, is just to encourage them, because more than not, they already have everything they need to tell their story effectively.
What are some of the reasons that people haven't wanted to share their story, even though it's incredibly powerful and could motivate other people to get screened or to get biomarker testing? Or
I just recently met with an amazing survivor, great story, and she really is very nervous about telling her story because of potential future job opportunities. I think that there's some of that. There's some stigma associated with colorectal cancer that we still struggle with. And sometimes patients are nervous how they will be perceived. And so I think that that's hard. And I don't know that that's just a colorectal cancer issue. I think that's a pan-cancer issue. But I think unique to colorectal cancer are some associated stigmas. And I think as we talk about health equity and certain communities and cultural nuances, that it becomes even more challenging.
I'd agree with that. And I think one of the things a mistake that organizations like ours can sometimes make is by loading up our patient representatives with all the facts and the statistics and the this and then that. And actually, they don't have to get that lodged in their head to make it a compelling story. When I listen to the radio and I hear people talking, it's not the facts I remember at the end of the day, it's the human story. It's what happened to that person or that group of people. And that's what I'll say to my friends when I meet them for a coffee later. Oh, I heard this really powerful story. I won't remember the facts. So, it's sometimes trying to ladle people down with those, what we call key messages that are less important than the story. And the other aspect of it really is, why does this matter? So we sometimes, we have things called drug appraisals here in the UK, where the health regulator decides whether or not it's cost effective to make a new drug available to a group of patients. And it's our job to persuade them that yes, it's 100% important that they do this. And so we take with us clinicians and patients, and the patients tell their story. And it's getting across to people who are looking at health economics, and and they've got an algorithm in their mind that's going to help them make that decision, but why this matters on a human level. And it's so powerful. So I think, in a range of areas, it's as Angie says, it's allowing people to tell their story authentically in their way. And the one thing that I would just the slight counter to that is when people are dealing with the media, just beforehand say, what are the bits about your story that you're not happy to talk about? Are there any elements of that you just don't want to share? And think about that up front, so that you're not blindsided by a journalist asking a question because they're curious that you suddenly feel very uncomfortable with. So if you can have those conversations up front and say, yes, I'll talk to you all about living with bowel cancer and my operations, but I'm not going there, then that can really help ease those conversations for patients.
You really both speak to the most important part, right? So we may not walk away from hearing a story of remembering the exact statistic, but you remember how the patient was impacted by an issue. And what are some of the tools, though, that you'll provide to patients that are saying that they're interested in sharing their stories?
So we do three things, and sort of unique to Fight CRC. Our founder was a research advocate, and she was really focused on the research side of colorectal cancer. And so we have a program called Research Advocacy Training and Support. We call it affectionately RATS, that goes through a curriculum. And then we also help them learn what are the latest clinical trials, what are the latest studies. We send them to ASCO and sort of the big scientific conferences so that they can be up to date. But that's a small group. For our advocates, our general group of advocates, we really train them online on policy, how to share their story, how to raise awareness, just sort of general public like efforts. And then last, when we talked about sort of that higher profile, someone who's interested in media, interested in telling their story, we have our ambassador training program where we commit a year of time and effort towards a small group of advocates where we provide them with a complete toolkit. We have their video of them online. We have a graphics package for them. We have a press kit for them so that they can really hone in on being a face of colorectal cancer. We commit a year to them and then they're off and running. And usually they, do their own thing, find their passion, and they may become a research advocate, they may become a policy advocate, but usually they're always sharing their story. So we try to hit those three opportunities to really train people who are interested in advocacy.
I think what Angie's described is absolutely gold standard for something for doing that. And I think it's absolutely amazing what you guys are doing in that space. I would say, sort of slightly turning the question a little bit around for us, the last 2 years where, as Angie says, we've all had to pivot online, we've all had to use tools that perhaps we wouldn't have grappled with the urgency that we've had to. And we've learned an awful lot. And I think I personally, and we as an organisation, have learned from some of our patient advocates and how they use some of the things like Instagram, how they use Facebook Live and some of those tools and others to reach their audience and to grow their audience. And it's been a real pleasure to work in partnership with them. And it's taught us a few new tricks as well. So, and also looking at, what's resonating with our community, it's very much those personal stories. I mean, most health conditions, you will find that the importance of story sharing, but I think particularly with bowel cancer, that's the case.
When it comes to evaluating the effectiveness of a campaign, of an advocacy issue, how do you evaluate beyond some of those high level, yes, we were successful, in terms of understanding if it was a successful initiative, as well as identifying areas where your organization can focus for future campaigns?
Sometimes it's really obvious you've got a campaign, you're shooting at a target and you manage to, you get your win and it's very clear. A few years ago, the British cycling team suddenly did really, really well. And they had a new guy in charge. And he had this policy of incremental gains. So if you improved everything by 1% across the piece, your performance would go through the roof. And that's what happened. And we won a load of medals. And I often think about that from an advocacy and campaigning perspective, because sometimes there is no big glory that you've got that big policy win, but you and your patients and their family and their loved ones and their clinicians all managed to improve the system by 1%. And that added up together means a much smoother, better, more successful experience for people coming along. And sometimes it's like that. It's endless hard graft, making those little incremental gains, and they are just as important. But you can't write about them so easily in your annual report.
I completely agree, especially with advocacy organizations, because I'll use the US, for example, our loophole bill took us, it was a colonoscopy loophole bill. And gosh, it took us and 10, 12, if not more organizations pushing on that for over 10 years. And it was those incremental gains and sustaining efforts that you're right. You can't put that in an impact report, but without those incremental gains, without that sustaining effort, we would have never passed that or fixed that issue. And so I always feel like those are the challenging ones. It's like, how do you capture being the squeaky wheel every single year and pushing others forward, maybe, or highlighting an issue that we're also similar, like in that we're not a huge organization, we're not $100 million organization, but we want to push $100 million agencies to do the right thing. And so sometimes that isn't easily captured, and sometimes you can't put it in a tweet or a Facebook post so you gotta just kind of be behind the scenes. And I think that those behind the scenes actions are so important. but hard to capture.
And I think you both have really spoken to this, and I think it's apparent in why both of your organizations are so successful and make such an impact in the community. How do you appropriately announce a success when many organizations have worked on it? And sometimes you guys have worked on it collaboratively, and other times it's been different initiatives that all led towards an end result, but weren't necessarily of an official coalition partnering.
I think we just take an approach where we just try to be really honest and recognize that we've been part of something that's had an incredible result, but not try to claim it as, something that we did. And we've all seen organizations do that, and it really puts 10p in your slot, doesn't it? Sorry for people who aren't familiar with British currency. I hope you get the idea of what I was trying to say. But yeah, recognizing that we are strong together and there are things that we can achieve together, and we can all celebrate those wins when they come along, when we've been part of it.
I think that's so important. I think it's a victory for the whole community. So I think you should celebrate it. And you should, I think one of the things that we've learned is gratitude's an amazing currency in the nonprofit space. And so when you're working together and you've worked in coalition, recognizing what your partners have done, to us is such a win, because you can't get there alone. I mean, we're not going to cure colorectal cancer by ourselves. It's going to take all of us to be there. So I think recognizing your partners is strong. And I think the advocates love it. Yeah. Like, I think the advocates love seeing people work together, recognize each other, celebrate together. I don't think it's seen, boastful necessarily. I think where it gets tricky, especially for like new organizations that are coming on, or people thinking about starting an organization, is how you tie the win. And I know that's, I know it's important as nonprofit groups that we need to fundraise. And I know that's an essential part of what we do. But I think that when you tie in a fundraising ask, needs to be really thoughtful. If it's a collective win and victory, then let it be a collective win and victory. I think where you start to, what Genevieve was talking about, you get a little bit, sort of a little uncomfortable, is when you have a philanthropy ask associated with something that was a collective win, and you don't take a moment to celebrate together and separate sort of your own individual organizational agenda necessarily.
It's a really good point. Absolutely. I wanted to pivot to get your perspective, particularly when you have an individual who has really been a very strong spokesperson for an initiative or for your organization. And, unfortunately aware is that, we will lose a lot of people that are strong advocates. I wanted to understand how you as an organization, both of your organizations, handle that. And then I also wanted to talk about the emotional side of that, in terms of what do you do in terms of recognizing that there was a person who was a leader as a volunteer for your organization that is no longer with us, and that impact.
I think that is the hardest part of our jobs, is loss. And yet it's the thing that fuels us to come back every single day, because we've lost such important, amazing people. When we hire people, I think it's like the second question we ask them is, how have you thought through loss? Have you thought through the experience of working here? Because you do meet amazing people and you lose amazing people. Our team is culturally very much like a family. And I would say that it's, when we lose people, it's, it is truly grief. There isn't some separation there, but we've had to be really intentional with our staff to say, if you need to take time off, you need to take the time off. You need to grieve in the moment, because I have seen people in the organization try to hold it together, and it gets really hard, and there is fatigue around that. So we've tried to really not only think about health and wellness for our advocates in our community, but also our staff, especially during COVID, because they were dealing with their own personal challenges with COVID and life, and then also dealing with that here. But I will add one more thing is when you hire survivors who are colorectal cancer survivors working in colorectal cancer, that is its own, support that you need to provide that person and time away. Because sometimes, you never know when PTSD erupts and a story just really hits you and you go through your cancer journey again. So I think those are all really important questions, and I don't know that I have a magic bullet for all of it, but we try to be as open about it and open about grief and sadness as we can.
I'd agree with Angie 100%. It is without doubt the toughest bit of the job that we do. And this was brought home to me when I first got this job. And I got a lot of people congratulating me on social media. And by the time I started, they weren't all still with us. And that was just a few weeks, and it's such a tough part of what we do, and we get to know, and I would echo the family point. It is very much a family. And so looking after each other is really important. And celebrating that person's achievement and hearing what people say and marking that and not letting those lights go out, and finding ways as an organization that we can support people to remember and celebrate. But it is really, really tough, and every situation is very, very different. And some you see coming and some you don't. And it's really important to take the time, as Angie says, just to take that moment and remember that person and their achievements and their families that are left behind.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really resonate with that. And there's no way that you would ever work for a patient advocacy organization and not experience loss. We all may grieve and experience loss in a different way, but it is going to happen. It is inevitable. One thing I would add is that, unfortunately, from lessons learned is and losing people is having those conversations about how they would like their story to be continued. Some of our organizations that are joining us today that have expressed interest in getting involved in advocacy and getting involved in policy, but have not for a number of reasons have not made that first step. What is your advice to those organizations that have not yet gotten involved, that are interested? Where would they start? Where would they turn?
On the US side, I encourage all the organizations to get involved in advocacy. We are only as strong as our collective voice. And where Fight CRC really fits is, I know that advocacy from a policy change standpoint doesn't fit everyone's mission, and that may not be the central thrust of what you're doing. So if you're a community group and you're really focused on providing patient support and you want your resources to go to patient support, then 100% do that. But you can still tap into groups like Fight Colorectal Cancer or BAL UK or others that are focused on policy, and just be a part of that network. Reach out and say, hey, I'm an organization in a local community focused on this, but I do want to be a part of this collective. I don't think it requires you to have a policy person on staff or a policy division or part of your mission. Stick to what you really are passionate about. And then on the policy side, connect with groups like ours, and we'll pull you in and educate your team and provide the opportunities. But I really think that the one thing that we can do is provide support for groups around the country to be engaged.
I'd echo that. I'd say to anybody who's thinking, I'd like to be an advocate, I'd like to be an ally, I don't know where to start, it's all a bit scary. Don't be scared of it. It's just persuading people who can make good decisions to do that. And and we all do that in our everyday life. Every single day, we persuade people to make the right decisions, or the decisions that we know are going to move our cause forward. And that's all it is. And there are organizations like Angie's, like ours, who will help you if you want to get really stuck in. But for now, just fire off an email to your legislator using one of those campaign emails. That's a start. You don't have to go full on in with your with your big ring binder and your policy asks and your well-costed arguments. It's about getting that voice together. And I don't know about everyone's country where they're coming from today, but certainly our politicians and our legislators are really influenced by the people that vote for them. And so if this is something that matters to their constituents, the people that live locally, then it will matter to them. So it's about getting people together and just starting that grassroots conversation and seeing where it takes you. Don't be scared, just jump in.
One of the things we'll be providing in our attendee hub here at the Congress is an opportunity to connect with all of these amazing organizations in the colorectal and bowel cancer space. Any last thoughts that you have, advice that you'd give to maybe a younger organization? Any tips or thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience would be welcome.
I would say best of luck. It's such an adventure. But the one thing I will say is that Bowel Cancer Australia reached out to us and had said, oh, we want to do something. And, we just sent them the whole project. I mean, we were just like, just take it, and if you want to do that in Australia, then that's great. We'd love to see it afterwards. But I think that for any young organization that's really thinking about, reach out to your sister organizations, get to know the leadership. I love getting to meet other colorectal cancer groups around the country and internationally because, there's camaraderie in it and you can share information and you're, having a joint mission. I just think it's a really cool thing that in colorectal cancer, there is that sense of community. I think we're the underdogs sometimes. And so when you're an underdog, you want to work with each other and you sort of scrappy. So I wish everyone the best of luck. I hope that you reach out. I hope we get to meet you. But it's been a pleasure to be a part of this panel. And I think if anything, at the very end, it's all about, we're in this together, right? Like we're in this for the patients. And I think we can all agree to that. And it's been really nice to be a part of this.
Yes, I'd agree with Angie 100% there. I think just everyone reach out because we will share, but also have a look at what other organizations are doing in different fields. Do you like what somebody's doing in HIV, for example? What tactics they're using? Well, could that work? Is that something that you could bring across to the work that you're doing? And I've certainly learned loads over the years from looking at what other organizations. I was just looking at a campaign that an organisation for older people is running in the UK right now, which I think is superb. And there's lessons about storytelling we can learn from that. So just have fun, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of it. And please do say hello. We'd love to chat.
Thank you to Genevieve and to Angie for this wonderful session. To learn more about Bowel Cancer UK or Fight CRC, please check out their website. Thank you.